For decades, movies and television have fed us the same story. Ninjas were masked assassins flipping across rooftops in black pajamas, while samurais were honorable knights who lived and died by a perfect code of honor. The conflict between them was simple: warrior versus assassin, light versus dark, honor versus deception. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Almost everything you believe about ninjas and samurais is a carefully constructed myth. Ninjas weren't mysterious shadow warriors who operated outside society. They were soldiers, spies, and guerrilla fighters who understood that information wins wars more reliably than swords. Samurais weren't flawless paragons of virtue. They were politicians, warlords, and sometimes brutal enforcers who bent their own codes whenever power demanded it. And the war between them? It wasn't some epic clash of opposing philosophies. It was strategic, political, and often invisible. So why did samurais fear ninjas, even though they were supposedly stronger? Why were ninjas officially forbidden, yet secretly employed by every major warlord in Japan? And how did the Onin War transform Japan into the perfect battlefield for invisible warfare? This isn't the story Hollywood told you. This is the real history, the brutal political chess game where samurais fought for reputation and ninjas fought for results, where honor was a weapon and invisibility was a strategy, where the greatest conflict in Japanese history wasn't settled on battlefields, but in shadows, secrets, and sabotage. If you want to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers, please hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like on this video, and comment below telling us what city you're watching from. Your support means everything. But before we can understand how ninjas and samurais became enemies, we need to understand something far more fundamental. They didn't just fight differently, they saw the entire world through opposite lenses. The samurai stood at sunrise with his katana raised, reciting oaths to his lord and ancestors. The ninja crouched in darkness, counting guard rotations and memorizing exits. Both were warriors. Both served powerful men, but they inhabited entirely different realities, separated not by geography or class, but by something far more fundamental: how they understood violence itself. To grasp why ninjas and samurais became enemies, you must first understand that they weren't just soldiers with different weapons. They were products of opposing philosophies about what it meant to fight, to serve, and to survive. One believed in the force of reputation, the other believed in the power of invisibility, and that difference made them natural enemies long before they ever crossed blades. Samurais lived by Bushido, the way of the warrior, a code that demanded loyalty, courage, and honorable death over shameful survival. This wasn't just a moral guideline. It was the entire framework through which a samurai understood his existence. His identity was inseparable from his lineage, his lord, and his reputation. When he drew his blade, he wasn't just fighting, he was performing his status in society. Battle was public. Death was witnessed. Honor was everything. The code stressed 7 core virtues: righteousness, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty. But the most critical virtue was meiyo, honor itself. A samurai's honor was considered more valuable than his life. If he failed his lord, betrayed his code, or lost face in battle, there was only one acceptable response: seppuku, the ritual suicide that restored honor through self-execution. The samurai would slice open his own abdomen with a wakizashi blade, exposing his soul and washing away shame through blood. But here's what the romantic versions of history conveniently ignore. Bushido was also a tool of political control. Modern scholars have demonstrated that the unified code we think of today was largely invented in the late 19th century during the Meiji era, used to manufacture nationalistic loyalty and military obedience. The historical reality was far messier. Samurai codes varied by clan and era. Early samurai were often pragmatic, prioritizing clan survival and personal advancement over abstract ideals of honor. During the chaotic Sengoku period, the age of warring states, Samurai lords spoke eloquently of honor, while manipulating alliances, breaking treaties, assassinating rivals, and crushing peasant rebellions with brutal efficiency. They demanded absolute loyalty from their retainers, while showing none to those beneath them. The rigid hierarchy of samurai society wasn't about nobility, it was about maintaining power structures where obedience flowed upward and violence flowed downward. The samurai fought for visibility. His victories had to be seen, recorded, and celebrated. After major battles, prestigious severed heads were arranged on tables and presented before the general. Each samurai would announce his name, lift a box containing the head he'd claimed, and describe the kill. If the head matched his claim, he received payment and recognition. The entire system was theater. Violent, bloody theater designed to reinforce status and reputation. Ninjas operated under an entirely different framework called Shinobi no Michi, the way of stealth. Where samurais valued public honor, ninjas valued mission success. Where samurais died for reputation, ninjas survived to complete objectives. The shinobi philosophy wasn't about glory, it was about results. According to the Banzen Shukai, the legendary 17th century ninja manual, ninjutsu divided into two primary functions: espionage and strategy. Ninjas gathered intelligence that changed the outcome of wars before a single sword was drawn. They infiltrated castles disguised as servants, merchants, monks, or even samurai themselves. They sabotaged supply lines, poisoned wells, spread misinformation, and turned enemies against each other without ever revealing themselves. The shinobi character, written as Ren, combines the symbols for blade and heart, representing endurance, patience, and the psychological warfare at the core of ninja tactics. Unlike Bushido's emphasis on battlefield valor and visible courage, Shinobi no Michi taught that the best warrior was the one who never had to fight at all. Victory belonged to whoever controlled information, not whoever wielded the sharpest sword. The fundamental difference extended to how each viewed violence itself. Samurais fought according to formal traditions, announcing challenges, observing rituals, respecting battlefield etiquette even when it cost them tactical advantage. Ninjas considered such traditions suicidal stupidity. Why announce your presence when silence gives you the advantage? Why fight fairly when the mission only requires success, not spectacle? Why die for honor when survival allows you to fight another day? The samurai fought for vision, to be seen as brave, loyal, and honorable by his peers and superiors. The ninja fought for information, to see without being seen, to know without being known, to control the battlefield through knowledge rather than strength. One believed that power came from the demonstration of force. The other believed that power came from the manipulation of perception. This wasn't just a professional disagreement. It was a fundamental clash of worldviews that made cooperation nearly impossible and conflict almost inevitable. When samurais looked at ninjas, they saw dishonorable cowards who fought without courage. When ninjas looked at samurais, they saw prideful fools who chose death over pragmatism. Both were partially right. Both were completely blind to the other's perspective, and that mutual contempt was about to ignite into open warfare when the entire structure of Japanese society collapsed into chaos, creating the perfect environment for ninjas to thrive and samurais to desperately need the very warriors they despised. In 1467, the city of Kyoto was the cultural heart of Japan. A magnificent capital filled with temples covered in gold leaf, aristocratic mansions with gardens designed to mirror paradise, and centuries of accumulated art, literature, and imperial tradition. 10 years later, it was ash. The destruction of Kyoto during the Onin War wasn't just a military catastrophe. It was the moment feudal Japan's carefully constructed hierarchy collapsed into chaos. And in that chaos, ninjas became more valuable than samurai armies. The war began with something almost absurdly petty, a succession dispute. Shogun Ashikaga Yoshimasa had no male heir, so he named his younger brother Yoshimi as successor. Then his wife gave birth to a son, Yoshihisa. Two powerful daimyo, warlords who controlled vast territories and private armies, took opposing sides. Hosokawa Katsumoto backed the brother. Yamana Sozen backed the son. Both assembled massive coalitions of samurai clans, each believing they could crush their opponent quickly and decisively. They were catastrophically wrong. The conflict that was supposed to last weeks dragged on for 11 years. What began as a political dispute in Kyoto metastasized into a nationwide civil war that shattered the already fragile authority of the Ashikaga shogunate. Samurai clans that had served the same lords for generations turned on each other. Ancient alliances dissolved overnight. The concept of loyalty, the foundation of the entire samurai system, became meaningless when no one could agree who deserved loyalty anymore. Kyoto became a battlefield. The eastern and western armies fortified positions throughout the capital, transforming neighborhoods into military zones. Fires, whether from combat, arson, or accident, consumed entire districts. The great temples that had stood for centuries burned to the ground. Aristocratic families fled the city, abandoning mansions that were looted and destroyed. Citizens who had never held weapons found themselves trapped between armies that showed no concern for civilian casualties. The destruction was so severe that historians describe Kyoto as essentially ceasing to exist as a functioning capital. The imperial palace itself, the symbolic center of Japanese civilization, was left abandoned and crumbling. When the war finally ended in 1477, neither side had won. Hosokawa Katsumoto and Yamana Sozen, the two daimyo who started the conflict, had both died before seeing its conclusion. Their armies simply ran out of resources, will, and reasons to keep fighting, but the war didn't end. It spread. The Onin War marked the beginning of the Sengoku Jidai, the age of warring states, a 150-year period of constant civil war that wouldn't end until Japan was forcibly reunified in the early 1600s. Provincial daimyo who had come to Kyoto to fight returned home to find their own territories in chaos. Subordinate samurai, seeing the shogunate's weakness, launched rebellions against their own lords in a phenomenon called Gekkokujo, the low overcoming the high. Power fragmented into hundreds of competing domains, each controlled by warlords who recognized no authority beyond their own strength. This was the perfect environment for ninja clans to thrive. While samurai society valued predictability, hierarchy, and formal combat, the chaos of the Sengoku period rewarded exactly the opposite: unpredictability, flexibility, and invisible warfare. The Shinobi of Iga and Koga, two mountainous provinces that had maintained autonomy from samurai control, suddenly found themselves in extraordinary demand. Desperate daimyo, who were losing territorial wars, discovered that traditional samurai armies had fatal limitations. Castles could withstand months-long sieges. Supply lines stretched across hostile territory were vulnerable. Enemy lords protected by loyal bodyguards were nearly impossible to reach. Rival clans held secret meetings to forge alliances that could shift the balance of power overnight. Samurai codes and battlefield honor meant nothing when you didn't know who your real enemies were or where they would strike next. Ninjas solved all these problems. Warlords began hiring shinobi operatives for missions samurai couldn't or wouldn't perform, sabotaging castles by infiltrating as workers and setting fires in ammunition stores or weakening structural supports. Assassinating rival daimyo by poisoning their food, bribing their servants, or attacking them during supposedly secure moments. Burning rice stockpiles to starve enemy armies before battles even began. Spying on secret meetings by disguising themselves as servants, monks, or even trusted samurai from allied clans. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The same samurai lords who publicly condemned ninjas as dishonorable cowards were secretly paying them enormous sums to do the dirty work that won wars. They would never admit to using shinobi. That would violate the sacred principles of Bushido. But in private, they understood a brutal truth. Honor doesn't win wars when your enemy is willing to fight without it. This was the turning point. Ninjas stopped being marginal figures operating on the edges of Japanese society and became essential political weapons. The Shinobi clans of Iga and Koga established sophisticated intelligence networks, trained operatives in advanced espionage techniques, and essentially created the first professional special operations forces in Japanese history. They didn't fight for honor, or lord or lineage. They fought for payment. And that made them more reliable than samurai, whose loyalty could shift with political winds. The Onin War revealed something samurai lords desperately wanted to ignore. Visible strength meant nothing against invisible strategy. 1,000 armored samurai couldn't defend against one ninja who knew which guard accepted bribes, which castle wall had a hidden weakness, or which lord's tea would taste the same with poison added. The age of honorable warfare was ending. The age of shadow wars had begun, and the samurai clans were about to learn that the ninjas they hired so easily were far harder to control and far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The provinces of Iga and Koga existed in a strange political limbo that infuriated every samurai lord who understood what it meant. These weren't normal territories governed by a daimyo with clear hierarchies and formal allegiances. They were essentially autonomous republics, communities of jisamurai, low-ranking warriors, and farmers who governed themselves through councils rather than submitting to any external lord. In a Japan where every inch of land was supposed to belong to someone with a title, Iga and Koga belonged to no one but themselves. This wasn't just unusual. It was ideologically offensive to the entire samurai system. Samurai society was built on rigid hierarchies where everyone knew their place. Peasants served samurai, samurai served lords, lords served greater lords, and everyone ultimately served the emperor through the shogun. The structure was sacred. It defined reality itself for the warrior class. Yet here were these mountain provinces operating outside the entire framework, refusing to pay taxes to regional daimyo, rejecting formal allegiance to anyone, and somehow getting away with it. The geographic isolation helped. Iga and Koga occupied mountainous terrain in central Honshu that was difficult to invade and easy to defend. The valleys were narrow, the forests were dense. The local population knew every trail, cave, and hidden passage. Any samurai army attempting to conquer these regions would find itself fighting an invisible enemy that could attack supply lines, ambush patrols, and disappear into terrain where cavalry and formation warfare were useless. But the real protection was their value as intelligence assets. During the Sengoku period, every major daimyo needed shinobi operatives, and the best came from Iga and Koga. Attacking these provinces meant destroying your own access to the most skilled spies, saboteurs, and assassins in Japan. So an uneasy equilibrium developed. Samurai lords hired ninja clans for missions while resenting everything they represented. The cultural contempt ran deep on both sides. Samurai despised ninjas for fighting without honor, for using poison instead of facing enemies directly, for disguising themselves as servants and monks instead of wearing armor and announcing their names, for prioritizing mission success over dying gloriously. To a samurai raised on Bushido principles, the entire shinobi philosophy was cowardice institutionalized. The fact that ninjas were often commoners or low-ranking jisamurai rather than noble-born warriors made the contempt even worse. In the samurai worldview, these people were supposed to obey, not operate as independent military contractors who could refuse missions or demand higher payment. Ninjas returned the contempt with interest. From the shinobi perspective, samurai were prideful idiots who valued reputation more than results, who would rather die honorably than adapt tactics to win, who followed rigid codes that made them predictable and therefore vulnerable. The ninja philosophy taught that survival and mission completion were the only metrics that mattered. A samurai who died in beautiful combat had failed. He was dead, and dead men couldn't complete objectives or protect their clans. Why should ninjas respect warriors who deliberately handicapped themselves with honor codes that got them killed? The territorial conflicts made everything worse. As the Sengoku period intensified, neighboring samurai domains began pressuring Iga and Koga to submit to formal governance. They demanded taxes. They demanded the right to station troops in the provinces. They demanded official recognition of daimyo authority. The Shinobi councils refused every demand. This wasn't just about autonomy. It was about survival. The moment Iga and Koga accepted a daimyo's authority, they would lose their neutrality and become targets for every lord who had enemies within that clan. Minor skirmishes erupted regularly. Samurai forces would attempt to collect taxes by force. Ninja operatives would ambush the collectors, burn their camps, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. Daimyo would send armies to punish the provinces. Those armies would find villages abandoned, trails that led to ambush points, and supply wagons that mysteriously caught fire at night. The samurai could win pitched battles. The ninjas refused to fight pitched battles. Even within the ninja regions, internal politics created complications. Iga and Koga weren't unified clans. They were collections of family groups with shifting alliances. The major clans, like Fujibayashi, Momochi, and Hattori in Iga, often competed for influence and contracts. Koga had its own internal factions that sometimes cooperated and sometimes pursued separate agendas. This decentralization made them harder to destroy, but also prevented them from presenting a unified front against external threats. The ideological clash intensified as the war period dragged on. Samurai society was becoming increasingly formalized, developing elaborate codes, ritual practices, and cultural traditions that distinguished true warriors from common soldiers. Bushido wasn't just about fighting. It was about performing a specific identity, maintaining hierarchies, and preserving a social order where everyone had their designated role. Ninjas rejected all of it. They wore whatever disguise the mission required. They took orders from whoever paid them. They survived by being shapeless, adaptable, and unbound by the social structures that defined samurai existence. This fundamental incompatibility meant peaceful coexistence was always temporary. Samurai lords needed ninjas, but hated needing them. Ninja clans profited from samurai conflicts, but knew they were tolerated only as long as they remained useful. The question wasn't whether this arrangement would collapse. The question was when. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the real history between ninjas and samurai, please subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. Your support means everything. The breaking point came when one daimyo decided that unifying Japan required destroying the ninja provinces entirely, not hiring them, not tolerating them, destroying them. His name was Oda Nobunaga, and he was about to launch the largest military assault on ninja territory in Japanese history. A samurai entering battle was a walking arsenal designed to project power. He wore oyoroi, laminar armor constructed from iron and leather plates laced together with silk cords, weighing up to 60 pounds. His helmet featured a mempo face mask designed to intimidate enemies and protect his throat. He carried two swords as symbols of his status. The katana, a curved blade between 2 and 3 feet long, optimized for cutting, and the wakizashi, a shorter companion blade used for close combat and ritual suicide. These weren't just weapons. They were legally restricted status symbols that only samurai were permitted to carry. But the swords were secondary for battlefield samurai. His primary weapon was the yari, a straight-bladed spear that could be anywhere from 6 to 20 feet long. In formation combat, where armies clashed in organized lines, spears outranged swords and allowed coordinated strikes that overwhelmed individual skill. The samurai also trained extensively with the yumi, an asymmetrical longbow over 7 feet tall that required years of practice to master. Mounted samurai archers were devastating in open terrain, able to fire accurately while riding at full gallop. Everything about samurai equipment emphasized visible combat. The armor announced his presence. The weapons required space and clear sightlines. The fighting style assumed honorable engagement where opponents faced each other openly. A samurai on a battlefield was meant to be seen, identified, and remembered. Ninjas built their entire tactical philosophy around the opposite principle: never be seen unless it served the mission. Their equipment reflected this completely different approach to warfare. Where samurai wore heavy armor, ninjas wore lightweight dark clothing that allowed silent movement through forests, over walls, and across rooftops. Some wore chainmail underneath for protection against blades, but it was thin enough to remain flexible and quiet. The iconic black outfit from movies is largely fictional. Real shinobi often wore dark blue or brown that blended better into shadows than pure black. And during daylight operations, they dressed as farmers, monks, merchants, or even samurai to avoid detection entirely. Their weapons were designed for concealment and versatility rather than status display. The kunai, often mistaken for a throwing knife in popular culture, was actually a multi-purpose digging and climbing tool with a leaf-shaped blade and ring pommel that could be used as a weapon in emergencies. The shuriken, small metal throwing stars or spikes, weren't meant to kill, but to distract, wound, or slow pursuers while the ninja escaped. The kusarigama, a sickle attached to a weighted chain, was devastatingly effective in duels because the chain could entangle an opponent's weapon while the sickle delivered the killing strike. This weapon was so effective against swords that samurai considered it dishonorable, specifically because it neutralized their primary combat advantage. Ninjas also employed makibishi, caltrops made from dried water chestnuts, or forged iron with spikes designed to pierce through sandals and disable pursuers. They carried blinding powders made from ash, pepper, or ground glass that could be thrown into an enemy's face. They used portable bamboo breathing tubes to hide underwater for hours. They developed collapsible ladders, grappling hooks, and climbing claws that allowed them to scale walls, samurai considered impregnable. Perhaps most significantly, ninjas were among the first warriors in Japan to fully exploit gunpowder technology introduced from China. While samurai initially dismissed firearms as dishonorable weapons unworthy of true warriors, shinobi operatives recognized their tactical value immediately. Small explosive charges could breach gates, destroy supplies, or create diversions. Smoke bombs allowed ninja teams to vanish during escapes. Poison, applied to food, water, or weapon tips, could eliminate targets without direct confrontation. But the ninjas' most powerful weapons weren't physical at all. They were psychological and strategic. Disguises transformed shinobi into invisible threats. A ninja infiltrating a castle might spend weeks or months working as a servant, gaining trust, learning guard rotations, and identifying vulnerabilities before executing his mission. False messengers could deliver fabricated orders that turned allies against each other. Agents infiltrated enemy councils and leaked intelligence that changed the outcomes of battles before armies ever met. This fundamental difference in approach created incompatible combat philosophies. Samurai fought to win, to demonstrate superior skill, maintain reputation, and secure glory. Victory meant defeating your opponent in direct combat where witnesses could verify your prowess. Ninjas fought to complete missions, to gather intelligence, eliminate targets, sabotage infrastructure, or escape with information. Whether anyone saw them succeed or even knew they had been there was irrelevant. In fact, the best ninja operations were ones where the enemy never realized they'd been infiltrated until it was too late. In direct combat, samurai training gave them significant advantages. Their armor, could withstand strikes that would kill an unprotected ninja. Their katana technique, refined through thousands of hours of practice, was faster and more lethal than the shorter straight blades ninjas sometimes carried. Their yari training meant they controlled the engagement distance in open terrain. Historical accounts suggest that in formal duels under battlefield conditions, samurai won decisively against shinobi opponents. But ninjas didn't accept formal duels. They didn't fight on battlefields under conditions that favored samurai equipment and training. They fought in forests where armor was a liability and heavy weapons couldn't maneuver. They fought at night, when visibility eliminated the samurai's ability to coordinate formation tactics. They fought by poisoning your food 3 days before you ever realized you were in danger. They fought by bribing your servants, learning your schedule, and attacking when you were alone and vulnerable. The strategic collision was inevitable. Samurai warfare required predictable engagements where honor codes, social hierarchies, and military formations determined outcomes. Ninja warfare required unpredictability, deception, and the systematic exploitation of every vulnerability those honor codes created. Every principle samurai valued, direct confrontation, announced challenges, visible courage, became a weakness ninjas could manipulate. Every technique ninjas employed, disguises, poison, night attacks, violated principles samurai considered essential to legitimate warfare. This wasn't just a tactical disagreement. It was a fundamental conflict about what warfare meant, what victory looked like, and what defined a warrior. And that conflict was about to explode into the largest military confrontation between samurai armies and ninja forces in Japanese history, when one man decided that invisible warfare was an existential threat that had to be eliminated forever. Oda Nobunaga earned his nickname the Demon of the Sixth Heaven through calculated brutality that terrified even hardened samurai lords. He burned temples filled with monks who opposed him. He massacred tens of thousands of civilian resistors at Nagashima, setting their fortified complex ablaze while they were trapped inside. He broke centuries-old alliances, executed rival daimyo through betrayal, and used firearm technology that traditional warriors considered dishonorable. By 1578, he controlled central Japan and was systematically conquering the fragmented domains that stood between him and unifying the entire country. But one obstacle infuriated him more than any military opponent: the Ninja Republic of Iga. Iga represented everything Nobunaga despised about the chaotic Sengoku period. It was a province that refused to acknowledge daimyo authority, operated outside the samurai hierarchy, and survived through guerrilla tactics that violated every principle of honorable warfare. Worse, they were farmers and low-ranking warriors who dared challenge samurai superiority. For a warlord obsessed with imposing centralized control through military force, Iga was an ideological cancer that had to be excised. The confrontation began in 1578 when Nobunaga installed his son, Oda Nobukatsu, as ruler of the neighboring Ise province. The young lord immediately looked east toward Iga with contempt. These weren't even proper samurai, they were jisamurai peasants who had expelled a governor sent to rule them. Nobukatsu decided to establish dominance by constructing Maruyama Castle on Iga's border as a forward base for conquest. The ninja clans responded with characteristic directness. In the middle of the night, shinobi operatives infiltrated the construction site and burned the unfinished fortress to the ground. It was a stunning humiliation. Nobunaga's own son had been outmaneuvered by commoners who fought from shadows. Furious and embarrassed, Nobukatsu assembled an invasion force of 10 to 12,000 samurai warriors. In September 1579, he launched a three-pronged assault through the eastern mountain passes into Iga. His destination was the village of Ie, where 4,000 to 5,000 Iga defenders waited. The samurai armies marched in disciplined columns, their armor gleaming, their banners announcing their clan affiliations, everything visible and organized exactly as traditional warfare demanded. The ninja clans let them enter the valley. Then they sprang the trap. Eager forces ambushed the samurai from the front while cutting off the mountain passes behind them, eliminating any hope of retreat. From concealed positions in the forests, defenders unleashed devastating volleys of arrows and arquebus fire. Then they charged with swords and spears while fog and rain descended, disorienting the samurai formations. The terrain that had seemed like a path to victory became a killing ground where heavy armor was a liability and formation tactics couldn't function. Nobukatsu's proud samurai army disintegrated. Warriors fell by the hundreds, unable to identify their attackers in the chaos. The invasion collapsed into panicked retreat. Those who could escape the valley fled back through the mountain passes, leaving their dead behind. It was a catastrophic defeat that proved ninja guerrilla tactics could destroy conventional samurai armies when the terrain and conditions favored invisible warfare. Nobunaga received news of his son's humiliation with cold fury. He was an experienced master of warfare who understood the mistake immediately. Nobukatsu had underestimated an enemy that fought without honor codes to restrict their tactics. Nobunaga would not repeat that error. For 2 years, he methodically assembled an overwhelming force specifically designed to annihilate Iga's guerrilla capabilities. On September 30th, 1581, Nobunaga launched the second invasion of Iga with 40,000 to 60,000 samurai warriors, nearly 10 times the population of the entire province. This wasn't a military conquest, it was systematic extermination. He divided his massive army into 6 separate forces that attacked simultaneously from every direction, making retreat or guerrilla resistance impossible. Commanders like Niwa Nagahide, Takigawa Kazumasu, Gamo Ujisato, and Asano Nagamasa led divisions that burned everything in their path: castles, shrines, temples, villages. But Nobunaga had learned from his son's failure. He employed ninjas from the Koga region and other provinces to infiltrate Iga's defenses, gathering intelligence on hiding spots, tunnel networks, and guerrilla bases. He turned the shinobi's own tactics against them, using espionage to anticipate ambushes and locate resistance strongholds. When Iga defenders tried to set traps, Nobunaga's forces were already aware and countered with overwhelming numbers. The fighting was brutal but brief. The most significant resistance occurred at Hijiyama Castle, which became the rallying point for northern Iga forces, and Kashiwara Castle in the south. But isolated castles couldn't withstand armies that outnumbered defenders 20 to 1. When Kashiwara surrendered on October 8th, organized resistance ended. The independent ninja Republic of Iga ceased to exist. Nobunaga visited the conquered province in early November 1581 and saw the devastation with satisfaction. Thousands of Iga inhabitants had been massacred. Their fortifications were destroyed. Their autonomous government was dissolved. He placed the territory under his son's control and withdrew his armies, leaving the message clear. Invisible warfare couldn't survive overwhelming conventional force applied with absolute ruthlessness. It should have been the end of the ninja clans. Militarily, they had been crushed, their homeland was occupied, their autonomy was erased. But in defeat, the shinobi won a different kind of victory. Nobunaga's strategy included one critical decision. He offered a ceasefire that allowed some ninjas to escape before the final massacres. Whether this was calculated mercy or strategic pragmatism, it meant that hundreds of trained shinobi operatives survived. They dispersed across Japan, infiltrating other clans, offering their services as intelligence specialists and covert operatives. The destruction of Iga didn't eliminate ninja warfare, it distributed it throughout the entire country. The techniques, knowledge, and philosophy developed by the militias of Iga became the foundation for ninja traditions across Japan. Samurai lords who had watched Nobunaga's invasion with approval soon found themselves hiring the very survivors they had helped destroy. The shinobi spirit, prioritizing mission success over honor, survival over glory, information over force, couldn't be eliminated through military conquest. Nobunaga had proven that massive conventional armies could destroy guerrilla strongholds. But he had also proven something he didn't intend. that ninja tactics were so valuable that even the warlord who annihilated them would soon need warriors who fought exactly the way Iga had. And one of those survivors would become the most legendary ninja in Japanese history, a man who would save the future shogun and prove that the destruction of Iga was only the beginning of the real Shadow War. When Oda Nobunaga was assassinated at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto on June 21, 1582, Tokugawa Ieyasu was approximately 200 miles away in Osaka, completely vulnerable. The warlord who murdered Nobunaga, Akechi Mitsuhide, immediately sent forces to hunt down potential threats, and Ieyasu was at the top of that list. He had only a small retinue of personal guards with him. His domains in eastern Japan might as well have been on another continent. Between him and safety lay hostile territory controlled by warlords who would gladly capture or kill him for political advantage. Every road was watched. Every mountain pass was a potential ambush point. This was the moment when one man's expertise in invisible warfare changed the course of Japanese history. His name was Hattori Hanzo Masanari, and he was about to execute what became known as the Iga Go, the Iga Crossing, the most legendary escape operation in the Shinobi tradition. Hanzo wasn't born a ninja in the romanticized sense. He was the son of Hattori Yasunega, a samurai who served the Matsudaira clan in Mikawa province. But his family had deep connections to the Iga region and its shinobi networks. From childhood, Hanzo trained in both conventional samurai combat and the covert arts of ninjutsu, espionage, infiltration, psychological warfare, and guerrilla tactics. By the time he entered service with Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1561, he represented a rare hybrid, a warrior who understood both the visible honor-based warfare of samurai and the invisible intelligence-based warfare of shinobi. Ieyasu recognized his value immediately. When Imagawa Ujizan held Ieyasu's wife and son hostage at Kaminogo Castle in 1562, Hanzo led the successful rescue operation that freed them. When the Ikoiki rebellion erupted in Mikawa in 1563, and most of Ieyasu's vassals, including many who followed the Iko sect, joined the uprising against him, Hanzo remained absolutely loyal despite being a follower of that same sect himself. He fought the rebels alongside Ieyasu, when doing so meant turning against his own religious community. But the incident that revealed Hanzo's character most profoundly occurred in 1579. Ieyasu's eldest son, Matsudaira Nobuyasu, was accused of treason and conspiracy by Oda Nobunaga and ordered to commit seppuku. Ieyasu, politically cornered and unable to protect his own son, ordered the ritual suicide to proceed. Hanzo was called to act as Kaishakunin, the second who would behead Nobuyasu after the stomach cutting to end his suffering quickly. It was a tremendous honor that demonstrated Ieyasu's trust. Hanzo refused. He would not raise his blade against his lord's son. When Ieyasu learned of this refusal, he reportedly said, "Even a demon can shed tears." The loyalty wasn't professional. It was personal, emotional, and absolute. This was the man Ieyasu turned to when he received news of Nobunaga's assassination while trapped in hostile territory. Hanzo didn't have an army. He didn't have castles or supply lines. What he had was something far more valuable: intelligence networks throughout the Iga region and personal relationships with shinobi clans who had survived Nobunaga's invasion the year before. The Iga-go became a masterclass in invisible warfare. Hanzo's plan avoided the main roads where Mitsuhide's forces waited. Instead, he guided Ieyasu and his small retinue through the mountainous Iga province using back trails, forest paths, and routes known only to local shinobi operatives. Along the way, Iga ninja who owed Hanzo favors, or who remembered that Ieyasu had allowed some of them to escape during Nobunaga's invasion, provided protection, intelligence, and safe houses. Portuguese missionary Luís Frois documented that Ieyasu's retainers like Sakai Tadatsugu, I Naomasa Honda Tadakatsu, and Sakakibara Yasumasa fought against Ochimusha Gari outlaws who attempted to rob or kill them during the journey. Sometimes they paid bribes in gold and silver to pass through hostile territories, But the core of the operation was Hanzo's network, the invisible infrastructure of informants, guides, and shinobi warriors who ensured that Ieyasu reached his domains alive. When Ieyasu finally arrived safely in Mikawa, he understood exactly what had saved his life. Ninja intelligence networks that operated outside the formal samurai hierarchy and could move through hostile territory invisibly. The destruction of Iga hadn't eliminated shinobi capabilities, it had dispersed them, and those dispersed operatives had just saved the future shogun of Japan. Ieyasu rewarded Hanzo lavishly. After helping defeat the Hojo clan at the siege of Odawara in 1590, Hanzo received 8,000 koku of rice, enough to support approximately 200 warriors. When Ieyasu entered the Kanto region, he received another 8,000 koku, plus 30 Yoriki subordinates and 200 public officials under his command. Most significantly, he was designated the official leader of all Iga ninja serving the Tokugawa shogunate. Hanzo established what became essentially the Tokugawa Intelligence Service. He commanded ninja operatives who performed espionage, counterintelligence, and covert operations throughout Japan. The Iga shinobi, who had been scattered after Nobunaga's invasion, found new employment under Tokugawa authority, their skills legitimized and institutionalized within the emerging shogunate structure. When Hanzo died in 1596, he had transformed from a battlefield commander into a legend. Later generations remembered him as Oni no Hanzo, Demon Hanzo, partly for his combat prowess, but mostly for his supernatural reputation as a ninja master. The Seininji temple he built in Yotsuya, Tokyo, commemorated Nobuyasu, the young lord he refused to execute. Even the Hanzomon Gate in Tokyo bears his name, marking where his residence once stood. But Hanzo's real legacy wasn't military, it was political. He proved that shinobi warfare could operate within the samurai system rather than against it. The invisible techniques that terrified samurai lords became tools they learned to employ strategically. The ninja clans that had been autonomous and threatening became institutionalized intelligence assets serving centralized authority. Ironically, this success was also the beginning of the end for traditional ninja culture. Once the Tokugawa shogunate pacified Japan and established the Edo period's rigid peace, there were no more wars for shinobi to fight. The skills that had saved Ieyasu's life became obsolete in a unified, controlled society where internal espionage was considered treason and external warfare ceased to exist. The question became unavoidable. What happens to warriors built for shadow wars when the shadows disappear and the wars end? The romanticized version of ninja versus samurai combat, depicted in countless movies and video games, never existed. There were no honorable duels between masked shinobi and armored warriors meeting at dawn to test their skills. There were no elegant exchanges of swordplay where superior technique determined the victor. The brutal reality was far more asymmetric, opportunistic, and psychologically devastating than any choreographed fight scene. Ninjas were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were intelligence operatives whose primary function was gathering information, not fighting. If a ninja found himself in direct combat with a samurai, it meant the mission had already failed. The entire shinobi philosophy emphasized avoiding confrontation whenever possible, because combat introduced unpredictable variables that could compromise objectives. A dead ninja couldn't deliver the intelligence he'd gathered. A captured ninja could be tortured into revealing his employer. Samurai, conversely, trained their entire lives for direct combat. From childhood, they practiced kata, formal sequences of movements designed to perfect technique. They studied kenjutsu, the art of the sword, under masters who had refined their schools for generations. They wore armor that could withstand arrows and blade strikes. They fought in formations where individual skill combined with coordinated tactics. In open terrain during daylight conditions, with clear sightlines, a trained samurai had overwhelming advantages against an unarmored opponent. So ninjas refused to fight under those conditions. They chose the terrain, the timing, and the circumstances. or they didn't fight at all. Forest ambushes were among the most common engagement scenarios when samurai forces pursued shinobi operatives. The dense vegetation negated every advantage samurai equipment provided. Heavy armor that protected against frontal strikes became a liability when running through undergrowth or climbing steep terrain. Long spears and formation tactics were useless when trees prevented line-of-sight coordination. Horses, the traditional battlefield advantage of mounted samurai, couldn't maneuver through thick forest. Ninja operatives would lure pursuing samurai into valleys or narrow trails, then attack from elevated positions. They used shuriken not to kill, but to strike exposed faces and hands, causing painful wounds that degraded combat effectiveness. They threw makibishi caltrops across escape routes, puncturing the feet of pursuers who tried to follow. They employed smoke bombs, mixtures of sulfur and other chemicals that created choking clouds and visual cover for withdrawal. Then they disappeared into terrain they knew intimately while disoriented samurai crashed through unfamiliar forest, trying to find enemies who were already gone. Night attacks were even more devastating. Samurai warfare traditionally occurred during daylight, when armies could see each other, formations could coordinate, and commanders could observe the battlefield. The entire samurai code assumed combat would be visible. Ninjas considered that assumption a tactical gift. During the Igago rescue operation, Hattori Hanzo's forces moved Tokugawa Ieyasu almost exclusively at night, traveling through darkness when potential enemies couldn't identify or intercept them. Castle infiltrations demonstrated the most extreme asymmetry. A samurai garrison defending a fortress fought according to established siege warfare principles, manning walls, guarding gates, patrolling perimeters. Ninjas bypassed all of it. They scaled walls using climbing claws and ropes during moonless nights. They dressed as servants and walked through gates during shift changes when guards were distracted. They bribed low-ranking personnel to leave doors unlocked or provide information about guard rotations. Once inside, they didn't announce their presence or challenge defenders to honorable combat. They moved silently through corridors, located their target, whether it was a document, a supply storage area, or a specific person, and completed the mission. If they needed to kill someone, they did it silently with blades to the throat or poison in food. If they needed to cause destruction, they set fires in strategic locations that would spread before anyone realized what was happening. Then they vanished, often before the alarm was even raised. Sabotage operations were equally one-sided. Samurai armies required supply lines, wagons of rice, ammunition stores, weapon caches. These were guarded, of course, but guards were human beings who got tired, bored, or could be bribed. Ninja operatives would identify the most vulnerable point in a supply chain, a storage building with a wooden roof, a wagon train camping for the night, a bridge over a critical river, and destroy it. The guards wouldn't even know they'd been infiltrated until the supplies were already burning. During the Tensho-Iga War, when Oda Nobunaga's son Nobukatsu invaded with 10,000 samurai, the Iga defenders didn't meet them in formation battles. They ambushed supply columns, attacked camps at night, set traps on mountain passes, and turned the invasion into a nightmare of invisible threats. Samurai warriors who had trained for battlefield glory found themselves dying from arrows fired by unseen archers, or stepping on caltrops that crippled them, or drinking from poisoned water sources. It wasn't honorable, it wasn't glorious, it was effective. The psychological warfare was perhaps the most brutal aspect. Samurai culture emphasized courage, direct confrontation, and fearlessness in battle. But courage means nothing when you don't know where the enemy is or when they'll attack. Soldiers become paranoid, exhausted from constant vigilance, suspicious of everyone around them. A ninja infiltrating a camp, disguised as a servant, could listen to every conversation, learn every plan, and report it all to his employer without anyone ever suspecting him. The few recorded instances where samurai and ninja fought directly confirm the pattern. Samurai won when they could force open combat under favorable conditions, and ninjas won when they controlled the circumstances. During Nobunaga's second invasion of Iga with 40,000 troops, the overwhelming numerical superiority meant ninjas couldn't avoid direct engagements. They lost decisively, but even in defeat, they inflicted casualties through guerrilla tactics until the sheer weight of numbers made resistance impossible. The reality was brutally simple. These weren't two warrior traditions competing on equal terms. They were incompatible approaches to warfare, where the deciding factor was always who controlled the conditions of engagement. Samurai fought to prove valor through visible combat. Ninjas fought to complete missions through invisible operations. When forced into each other's preferred environments, the outcomes were predictable. But neither tradition could exist forever in the form they had developed during the chaos of the Sengoku period. Japan was about to undergo a transformation that would make both samurai battlefield heroics and ninja covert operations obsolete, because the greatest threat to warriors isn't defeat in combat, but the elimination of combat entirely. When Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated his rivals at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600 and established the Tokugawa shogunate 3 years later, he accomplished what no warlord had achieved in over a century. He unified Japan under centralized authority. For 260 years, the Edo period brought unprecedented peace. No major wars, no nationwide conflicts, no desperate daimyo hiring shinobi to sabotage enemy castles or assassinate rival lords. It was exactly the stability Japan needed, and it was a death sentence for traditional ninja culture. The last major military employment of ninja operatives occurred during the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637-1638. Christian rebels fortified Hara Castle and held out against Tokugawa forces for months. The shogunate deployed Koga and Iga ninja to infiltrate the castle at night, gather intelligence on defenses and supply levels, and sabotage fortifications. When the castle finally fell, over 37,000 rebels were massacred. It was a brutal demonstration of Tokugawa power, and it was the final detailed historical record of ninja employed in open warfare. After that, silence. Not because ninjas suddenly vanished, but because their traditional functions became obsolete. In a unified, peaceful Japan, where the shogunate controlled all major domains and prohibited warfare between clans, there were no more castles to infiltrate, no enemy supply lines to sabotage, no rival daimyo to assassinate. The skills that had made shinobi invaluable during the Sengoku period, espionage, guerrilla warfare, covert assassination, were now considered treasonous activities against the established order. Some ninja clans adapted by joining the Oniwabanshu, the secret intelligence service that monitored potential threats to the shogunate. These weren't the autonomous operatives of the Warring States period. They were government employees conducting surveillance on suspected dissidents and reporting directly to Tokugawa officials. Others became policemen, palace guards, or low-ranking bureaucrats. A few maintained their traditions in secret, preserving techniques through private training that had no practical application in peacetime, but most simply faded into civilian life. The Jizamurai farmer warriors, who had formed the backbone of Iga and Koga's militias, returned to agriculture. The skills passed down through generations became historical curiosities rather than survival necessities. By the 18th century, ninja was already becoming a mythical term rather than a practical military designation. Samurai experienced a parallel decline, though their fall was slower and more culturally complicated. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, the warrior class transformed from battlefield fighters into administrative bureaucrats. The samurai who had once charged into combat with spears and swords now pushed papers in government offices, managing tax collection, legal disputes, and ceremonial functions. They retained their social status and the right to wear two swords, but those weapons were increasingly symbolic rather than functional. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 destroyed even that symbolic status. The new government abolished the samurai class entirely. They prohibited sword carrying, They eliminated the stipends samurai families had received for centuries. They created a modern conscript army where peasants with rifles replaced noble warriors with katanas. Some samurai rebelled, most famously during the Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, where traditional warriors charged modern artillery and were slaughtered. But the outcome was never in doubt. The age of the samurai was finished. Yet even as the historical realities ended, the cultural myth-making began. Kabuki theater had been romanticizing both samurai and ninja since the Edo period, transforming brutal warriors into theatrical heroes. Plays depicted ninjas with supernatural abilities, walking on water, turning invisible, transforming into animals. They showed samurai as perfect embodiments of honor who never compromised their principles. These weren't historical accounts. They were entertainment that prioritized drama over accuracy. The 20th century accelerated the distortion exponentially. Japanese cinema reinvented the samurai as tragic heroes caught between duty and emotion, exemplified in films like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo. Ninja became action heroes in movies and manga, performing physically impossible acrobatics and wielding weapons that had never existed historically. Western audiences consumed these myths eagerly, creating global franchises like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Naruto that had virtually no connection to actual shinobi history. The cultural impact created a strange paradox. The real samurai, warriors who often prioritized pragmatism over honor and used ninja tactics when convenient, became symbols of unwavering moral codes. The real ninja, intelligence operatives who avoided combat and dressed as peasants, became masked assassins who flipped across rooftops in black uniforms that would have been tactically absurd. Both transformations erased the historical complexity in favor of simplified archetypes that fit modern storytelling needs. Why do we still love these warriors? Perhaps because they represent opposing ideals we find compelling. Samurai embody visible honor, the idea that how you fight matters as much as whether you win, that reputation and legacy justify sacrifice. Ninjas embody invisible pragmatism, the idea that mission success justifies any method, that survival and results matter more than glory. These aren't just historical philosophies. They're eternal tensions in human psychology, honor versus effectiveness, visibility versus invisibility, dying well versus surviving at all costs. The distorted myths serve emotional purposes the historical truths can't fulfill. We want to believe in warriors who live by perfect codes, even though real samurai constantly broke those codes for political advantage. We want to believe in shadow warriors who can accomplish impossible missions, even though real ninja mostly gathered information and avoided combat. The legends give us heroes, history gives us humans. But perhaps the greatest irony is this: the conflict between ninja and samurai, the war between visible force and invisible strategy, between honor codes and mission pragmatism, between warriors who fought to be seen and warriors who fought to remain hidden, never actually ended. It just changed theaters. Modern militaries still struggle with the same tensions. Conventional forces versus special operations, open warfare versus covert intelligence, publicly acknowledged battles versus classified missions that can never be discussed. The samurai became soldiers. The ninja became intelligence operatives. The war continues. We just stopped calling it by those names. And that raises one final question that echoes across centuries. In a world where information determines outcomes more than military strength, where wars are won through intelligence networks before armies ever deploy, where the most critical battles occur in shadows rather than battlefields, did the ninja actually lose? Or were they simply centuries ahead of their time, waiting for the rest of the world to realize that invisible warfare was always the future? Stand in Kyoto today and watch the shadows lengthen across ancient temple walls. The city rebuilt itself after the fires of the Onin War consumed it, just as Japan rebuilt itself after centuries of internal conflict. But something remains in those shadows. Something that never died when the last ninja disappeared into peacetime obscurity or when the final samurai laid down his sword. The war between visible and invisible warfare never ended. It simply evolved beyond the specific warriors who embodied it. Every modern military force struggles with the same tension that defined ninja versus samurai. Conventional power that announces itself versus covert operations that succeed through secrecy. Open battles with clear victors versus intelligence wars where no one acknowledges what happened. Fighting for reputation versus fighting for results. The samurai fought for glory, to be remembered, celebrated, honored in death. They believed that how you fought mattered more than whether you survived. They constructed elaborate codes that transformed violence into performance, making warfare a theater where status and reputation were the real prizes. When they died, they wanted poets to record their names and artists to paint their final stands. Visibility was everything. The ninja fought for silence, to complete missions without witnesses, to survive without recognition, to change history without anyone knowing they had been there. They believed results were the only metric that mattered, and that the best operations were ones where the enemy never realized they'd been infiltrated. They rejected codes that made them predictable and embraced pragmatism that made them effective. When they succeeded, no one wrote their names. Invisibility was their weapon. And together, through centuries of conflict, they created a history the world never understood. We romanticized the samurai into perfect warriors who never compromised their honor, ignoring that real samurai broke their codes constantly when power demanded it. We transformed ninja into superhuman assassins who performed impossible acrobatics, erasing the reality that they were intelligence operatives who avoided combat and dressed like peasants. The myths became more powerful than the truths. But perhaps that's because the truths were uncomfortable. The samurai showed us that honor systems can be tools of political control disguised as moral codes. The ninja showed us that invisible warfare often determines outcomes more effectively than visible strength. Together, they demonstrated that war is never simply about who has the sharpest sword or the strongest army. It's about who controls information, who understands psychological warfare, and who's willing to use methods others consider dishonorable. The shadows remain because the questions remain. Is it better to die with honor or survive through pragmatism? Should warriors fight according to codes that limit their effectiveness or employ any tactic that achieves objectives? Does reputation matter more than results? Or do results render reputation irrelevant? Japan answered those questions by eliminating both warrior traditions and entering modernity, but the world keeps asking them. Every time a government debates whether to acknowledge covert operations. Every time a military chooses between visible deterrence and invisible infiltration. Every time someone must decide whether to fight by rules their opponent doesn't follow. While shadows exist in Japan and everywhere else, the war between the visible and the invisible will continue echoing. Not with samurai and ninja, not with katanas and kunai, but with the same fundamental conflict about how power should operate, in the light where everyone can see it, or in the darkness where it moves unseen. The samurai and ninja are gone. The war they represented will never end. If this deep dive into the real history behind ninjas and samurai opened your eyes to truths you never knew, please subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Hit that like button right now and comment below telling us what surprised you most about this story. Your support means everything and helps us create more content that reveals the history they never taught you in school. The greatest deception in history wasn't a ninja disguise or a samurai's false alliance. It was convincing the world that the war between them ever truly ended.